Alright gang, we're going to create a Windows Forms app using a file with names in it. So I've got a .txt file created that has student names in it. So we start out, we've got our form here. Let's make it a little bit bigger. And let's add some items, or some objects I should say, to our form. We'll put a submit button on there, and that'll allow us to display the results or the data that we're retrieving from that text file. We'll use a list view to actually display the data on this form. So we'll go ahead and resize these, and so list view is going to let me populate this out. I could have multiple columns, single columns. Ultimately, we're going to have it with a single column. I only wanted to click once and double click. So let's go back. We'll put display on our button, and we'll have display list because I want to display the entire list. So now that we've got that button, and here's our list, let's go look at the code. And here's our click event associated with that display button. And I'm just going with the default names that it gave us. So for our code, we have to connect to that file. But I'm not just going to connect to the file, I'm going to populate a list. So I want to make sure that list is clear when I populate it. And this is forward thinking. At some point I'm going to have a populated list, and I want to wipe it out when I reset it. So list view 1.items.clear. So there's a clear function associated with the items in that list view 1. So the object itself, we've cleared it out. Let's create a stream reader. I got to go back up, and using system.io, if I import it now, I won't have to write as much in my code. So now all I have to do is reference the stream reader class that exists. I'll create an instance of it. I'll call it file in. So file in will be a new instance of stream reader. I need to put the equal sign in here. And I'll go ahead and put empty parentheses for now. And that's where I'm going to put the path to the file that I'm actually connecting to. I open it. I like to always go close it as soon as I remember. And I'm remembering now. So we'll go ahead, and my object is file in.close. So I'm creating the connection up top, and now here I'm closing it. And then everything's going to take place in the body of this action. So let's put the path to the file that we're connecting to. So I put the ampersand at, and in quotation marks, the path to the file. If it's not a local file, you may have some problems with the connection, security settings, etc. So I just picked a D drive file. It's on my thumb drive, and I called it names.txt, and I populated it with student names. So that will actually create the connection, but I need somewhere to put the things that I'm acquiring. Each time I bring a name in, I need to put it somewhere. So each name, I'm going to call it, create a string. I'll call it line, and I'll initialize that line string with nothing. So I'll put empty quotes, and each time I go through my iterations, I want to count. So I'll create an integer called counter, initialize it to 0, and that's if I want to keep track of how many items are on the list. And since I'm reading in a list, let's create a list of strings. Now it's similar to an array, but it's a different class of code, so we have different functionality associated with it. So I'll call it list lowercase l. Uppercase L in list is reserved, so I'll use the lowercase, equals new, and I'll initialize it to 0. And that's if I want to keep track of how many items are on the list. So list string. There we go. So there's my list where I'm going to store the data that I get out of my file. So I've got the connection, I've initiated the connection to the file. I've got somewhere to put what I'm retrieving. So I'll create a while loop to populate that list. And in my while loop, I need to look at, I called the connection file in. And I called my string line, so I'm going to say line equals file in dot read line. And that actually reads each line in my file. But I only want to do that. I only want to go through this iteration in my loop while there's something in that line in the file. So that says while line equals file in dot read line, while there's something there, we're going to do it. So I say it not equivalent to null or not null. So while there's something there, we're going to do this loop. And in the loop, let's say I want to add it to my list. So list dot add line. Bear with me a second. So we'll say list dot add. I'm going to add something to my list, and I'm going to add that line that I read in. So that's that string variable I created. So each item that I read from my file, I bring it in and I add it to my list. And then I'll increase that counter. So that keeps track of how many times I went through. So that took care of that. I've got it in. I've got a list of items. Now I need to do a little bit more than that. I need to do a little bit more. And what I need to do is I want to take what's in that list and I want to add some functionality to that list. Remember I said there's things I can do in a list that's a little bit easier than an array. So let's take that list and we're going to convert it to an array. So let's create a string array and we'll call it ARR, the first three characters in array. And we'll take list dot to array. So there's functionality associated with that list to where I can convert that list to an array. So I've taken my list that's populated from the file, converted it into an array called ARR. Now let's take the array functionality, array dot sort, and I'll pass it my array, and it will actually take my array and sort it out for me, alphabetically, numerically, whichever may be the case. For this, it's alphabetically since it's an array of strings. So now I've read in that array, and the only thing I need to do is take what's in the array and use it to populate my list view. So let's go through the array using a for each. So say for each, and there are strings in this array, right? So string item in ARR. I'll put my curly braces for the body of this for loop. And we'll say list view 1 dot items typo dot add, and I want to add an item. So for each item in the array. So that's going to take what I have in my array and go through each index, checking for each item that exists in the array, and it's going to populate it into that list view. Let's go run it and see what it looks like. display it. So we populated it. It's not as pretty as I'd like it to be. And that's because of a setting on list view. We'll go back and we'll change that setting. So there's attributes associated with each of these objects that we've created. So let's go look at that list view. And it's the view attribute. It's currently large icon. Let's change it to list. All right, let's go ahead and run it and see now with the new attribute, see what our list view looks like. And we'll display it. Now it's a nice list. Not only is it populated, and it looks more orderly than it did before without all that spacing, but it is, in fact, now sorted for us. So we're able to read from a file and display the results in this list view. But I want to be able to, as well as just read the list, I want to be able to add items to the list or remove items from the list. So let's go to our toolbox and we'll grab some buttons and some text boxes. The buttons to initiate the event and the text boxes to allow the user to input data. So we'll have the 2, 1 for add an item and the other to remove an item. So there's 2 buttons. I always try to keep things in some kind of alignment. As I reposition them, you'll see the blue lines kick into place, and that's just letting me know that they are aligned. So I'll put text box for add an item and a text box for remove an item. So we can resize these, reposition them, and we'll get it all dialed into where it's a personal preference thing on what you like your forms to look like. Now, usability and the user's ability to understand what you want from them, how to do it, that's a big deal. So that's, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I was going to type into the button and it fired up my quick event for me. Let's just go over here to the properties and I'm just going to change the text that's displaying on that button. Call that one add item, and we'll give this one a text of remove item. So now it needs to be a little bit bigger so you can see full text. There we go. So it's not just about functionality, it's got to be pretty as well. So now we've got our 2 buttons in place. We're going to associate a click event with each one of them. And we've got our text boxes. User's going to input text into it, and we're going to either add that to our list or remove it from the list. And when we hit display list, that'll populate that list box with an updated or current listing of names. So we can go through and we'll click our button and go look at the code behind. Make sure we've got a click event for each one. So we've got a click event for that button 2. So button 2 is our add item, and button 3 is our remove an item. So let's go into button 2, and for button 2, we're going to essentially have to create a connection to the file, and we've already got using system.io, and we've already made one connection to it to populate that list view. So for this, I'm essentially wanting to go read what's in there, and I want to I don't even want to read what's in there. Let's go and we're going to write to it. So it doesn't matter what's there. We're just going to add to the file. So I'll say stream writer, and let's call it file out. So I'm sending information out to the file. And it's a new instance of, well, if I use new stream writer, that's a possibility. If I use new stream writer, and here's where I would send it to, if I do this, I'm actually overwriting what's there. So here's one option. I can use this code, and I overwrite what exists. To save us some time, rather than saying new stream writer, we'll just take that file and we'll append to it. So we'll say file dot append text. So this will allow us to make a connection to a stream writer connection. We're just connecting to the file to write to it, and we end up, once this connection is open, not at the beginning of the file and start writing there and overwriting, but we end up at the end of the file and we're just adding to it. So let's say, what are we going to do? Well, we'll go, oops, I don't want while.close. I want fileout.close. And let me back up here. Sorry about that. I had to do something else there for a second. So we've got file.out. We closed it. And we want to just write to that file. So we'll say fileout.write. So it's similar functionality to fileout.close, but instead of closing it, on this line, we're going to write a line to that file. And what are we going to write? We're going to write the contents of that add item text box. So that text box right here, we're going to use the text attribute of that object as our value, or the parameter that we're passing to this method. So text box 1 dot text. Okay, so that will allow us to actually write to the file. We don't need more code than that. Okay. One thing we do need one thing. I want to make sure that somebody actually gave me something. They actually put something in that text box. So I don't want to just write nothing to it. So let's check to see if there is actually something there in that text box. So we'll do it with an if statement. And if text box 2 dot text, go back and correct my text, because I've got, you remember, case sensitivity is a big deal when it comes to any of the programming languages we deal with. So we'll change this to a big B and a big T. It's not equal to empty quotes. Open and closing curly braces. I'll go back and change that text box name there to where it actually points to the right object. At this point, it's saying that it doesn't recognize it. That just needs to be a big B, and that needs to be a big T. So if there's nothing there, we'll actually go right on through this and skip it. If there is something there in that text box, that code actually gets run. So let's go run it. We'll display the list. I'd like to add Steve to the group. So here's Steve. Add item. Steve's name is still there. I might want to make that go away once I've added it. Let's refresh it. There we go. And now we see Steve in the list. Remember, we had the forward thinking that we were going to wipe out that list as soon as we had that click event. What that did was, rather than adding more text to the list, it cleared it so that we repopulate it with only a single instance of that current list. So we can read the information from the file. We can append information or new names to that list. So let's go ahead and wipe that text box out at the end of our work there. Textbox1.text equals empty string, nothing there. Let's start looking at our other click event. The other one is to actually remove something from the list. Now I want to do the same kind of thing and verify that there is something in that text box. So we'll start out with that, and I can just reuse little bits of code. And let's go up top and actually use some code from up above, because I actually have to read in to find out what's in the list. So we're going to read in what's in the list, or in the file I should say, just like we did before. And we'll populate our list and populate an array. But we'll go look and see if the value that's in the list, or I should say if the value that's in the text box is in the list. We'll do a little comparison. And if it is the case, then we can go and remove it. So let's take this object we created up here, this instance of StreamReader. Well, it worked for us there. We'll take that whole bit of code all the way down to the putting it in the array. We know it works, so we'll reuse it. So now I've got, if that text box has something in it, we can go read the information from the file into an array. And that got us the information in. Now beyond that, we need to take this and we need to do a comparison. And our comparison is going to be, we know there's something in there. We know that there's something in text box 2. So let's take our list, and we're going to say list. Remember I said there's functionality associated with a list that's maybe a little user-friendly, a little more user-friendly than an array. So I'll say list dot remove, and I can pass it the value that exists in that text box. All right. I'll go ahead and type this in, and the parameter that I'm going to pass to that remove is, just like I did up above, but I'll do it now, textbox2.text. So it's similar to what I did when I passed textbox1.text out to that write line function for file out. And this one, I'm removing it from the list. Okay. From here, we'll go ahead and we'll wipe out that text box, make whatever was there go away. And so I have received a value from the user. I've removed it from my list itself. And now here I populate that updated list to the array. I sorted that array out. So now I'm ultimately going to add it back into the file alphabetically. So how are we going to write it to the file? Well, let's use our StreamWriter functionality. I got to remember to do file in.close. It's something I should have done previously as soon as I copy that over. So I've got it closed. And at this point, I have to have my stream writer, and we'll say stream writer, and I can use the same name, file out, because I'm going to actually write out to the file. And on this one, I'll call it a new instance of stream writer. Remember this, the difference here is I'm overwriting whatever exists, and I'll use that same path that I have up above. I'll copy that path. I'll paste it in here. And now I'll use a for each, like I did before. And let me close that connection. Go back above. And for each string item, so similar to what I did before. Before I populated the list, now I'm actually going to populate the output file. So for each string item in the array, the same logic that we've already used. We'll put our curly braces in here, and it's just a one-liner. File out dot write line, and I'm going to pass it the item that's in the array, item. I'll close that. So we should have our full functioning code at this point. Run it. So I can display the list. Steve's still there from last time. Let's go in. We'll add Lee. Display it. Now we see Lee. That works. It worked last time. Let's see if we can remove somebody. Second thought, I don't want Lee on the list. Let's remove it. Display list. Now Lee's gone. So we've got the functionality we need. It's sorted out for us. We can add items, remove items. Display list, it only comes up one time because we cleared it before we populated it. We cleared these others before we populated them. I'll add Jeff. Jeff's there. So simple enough, we can go add items, remove items. If I want to remove Lester, Lester's removed. All right. So we got it working. I could have changed the name up here, called it something like we did in class. So we'll see you on the next one.